welcome back to my channel. I am Jason and this is from Sin's Perspective Reviews. So as the title states, I'm going to be doing a recap of Rosemary and Thyme Season 1, Episode 3, The Language of Flowers. So Rosemary and Laura are off on their next adventure, okay? They have been hired by this spa to revamp and kind of repair this waterfall that at one point in time in its heyday was this glorious, beautiful waterfall with all these beautiful flowers. It is now fallen into disrepair, and they want to breathe some life back into it. So, but of course, nothing is ever that simple. Family drama ensues, and of course, a murder happens. But we'll get to that. So, Rosemary and Laura, they're with the owner Frances and her son Jeffrey, and they're basically going into kind of talking about the waterfall a little bit and what their expectations are and what their, mainly Frances, who's the mom, the owner, what she, wants from them. She wants them to completely redo it. There's been an issue as far as the water flow. There's a leak somewhere, so the waterfall isn't working properly, and of course the flowers, she wants them completely replaced. While they're having this conversation, there's this couple, the Walshes. They were out jogging, and the quarry wasn't properly marked off. So you can kind of see how they would think that it would be there. Could resemble a staircase, and so I guess they were trying to take this shortcut to we don't know where, and the wife slipped and sprained her ankle, and the husband almost fell off. And so of course it's this whole kind of situation with them trying to help the husband to keep him from falling and trying to deal with the wife. And of course she is upset, and Frances, the mom, is kind of a rough kind of woman, and she was like, oh, just get this stupid woman out of here. Like she had no time. And even though they were at fault, I mean, the spa was at fault because it wasn't properly marked off. And so they get them all packed into, they call the paramedics. I can't remember, did the wife go in an ambulance? I think she did. And the husband, of course, followed and talked about how they were going to sue the spa. So, of course, this sends Jeffrey into a tizzy. Rosemary and Laura are now in Kate's office. Kate is Frances' daughter, Jeffrey's sister. And they started asking her about Fenella Goff. Fenella Goff is the person who actually designed the waterfall and the plant arrangements and the whole thing. And Kate was, basically said that, she didn't know her. The mom and Frances and Fenella had fallen out before she was born, and the mom ended up having to fire her. And so she don't really know too much about her, but she did tell them that she has a daughter named Maggie who works in town. She works as a florist. And they saw a book on Kate's desk, and it's a book called The Language of Flowers, and it was based on this manuscript that her father had written and never got a chance to publish because he had passed away. And so they decided to publish the book. And it didn't set the literary world on fire, but they thought that it was just a good, it was just basically something that they could do for their father. And so Kate eventually ends up inviting them to dinner, so they can meet everyone. And she even said that she would invite Maggie, so they'll have a chance to meet with her. So Jeff and his mom, they're talking about what could be a potential lawsuit. And again, Frances could not be bothered. She was like, okay, well, how long were they planning on staying? And he said a week. She was like, okay, we just won't send them a bill. And Jeffrey, it seemed like they may have been having some financial trouble, and Jeffrey was kind of like, we cannot afford to take this hit financially if they do decide to sue us. And so, but Frances was like, just comp their stay, just don't send them a bill. And he got upset and was like, why don't you ever just let me make my own decisions? And she was like, I never, try to make decisions for you, but only when it comes to my money. And so you can see that there's this, kind of animosity between him and that he has towards his mother. Granted, she's not the most pleasant person to be around, but you know, that gives you an insight on, you know, their relationship. So Gary is married to Kate, and they make it a point to show him flirting with this woman who's a client. He's a massage therapist, so she's there for a massage. And so you see Kate watching on the security cameras as they walk into his room. Now you get the impression that Gary does more than just massage the folks. And I think Kate is aware of that as well. So you could tell by her facial expression as she's watching him lead this client into his room. So Rosemary and Laura, they're at the nursery now. They're trying to decide which flower arrangements they want. I think that Frances, they had very specific, I think they may have told them more of what they didn't want. And so they're just trying to work with that. And so they met Maggie, and I think Rosemary ended up asking her if she, no, they met her, they talked briefly, and she did tell them that Kate called her and invited her to dinner, and you know, but she was in a hurry. She had something else that, you know, she needed to do. They also met Pete. Pete worked at the nursery, and he was kind of helping them pick out flowers. And he also had, surprise, had a cottage that he needed to rent. Apparently the people who were supposed to rent it before, it fell through. And he's like, I can't afford to just have it sit empty. So that's, you know, they decided to stay in at Pete's cottage. So we flash back to Kate. Kate ends up going to Gary's room. Clearly this is after the client had left, and you can see him when she walked in. You can see him kind of holding this money up to the light, trying to make sure it's real or something. So I don't know if Gary is a massage therapist slash gigolo, or that's how he sees himself. But she walked in and she said, what did she say? I guess another satisfied client, something to that effect. And he was like, well, not everybody's wife is as tight-assed as you. Now, this is her husband. So you get a taste of, you can see their relationship, their marriage, or I don't even want to use the word relationship at this point, is non-existent. That you can almost see, like, you can kind of see they really dislike each other at this point. It's time for dinner. Laura and Rosemary arrive at the house, and they talked briefly with Kate. Kate is actually preparing the food. And okay, of course, the door rang, and Maggie arrives, and you know, they started talking. And Rosemary asked her if she had any of her mother's old like plans or designs for the waterfall, to give them an idea of what could possibly be, you know, the issue as far as the water draining off. Maybe, you know, this will help them decide on how they can, you know, approach as far as the repairs and maybe even the layout and design. And she explained to them that, you know, no, she, you know, her mother died when she was probably 2 or 3 years old or something. So she really doesn't know much about her mother. And so the bell rings again, and Laura goes to answer the door. But before she do, you can see it's Gary and Jeff. Gary is Kate's husband. Jeff is Kate's brother. And Jeff made it a point to say that Mrs. Moffat, she requested to have another appointment with you, and I guess things are going well. And he ends up saying that, you know what, I'm not going to cover for you again. So it's known that Gary is a philanderer and just a crappy husband. And so he was unbothered. He basically Gary told Jeffrey, you know what, you just need to get a life and basically stay out my business. Anyway, so Laura answers the door, and Gary is trying to pull his little, whatever he considers to be, charm on Laura, about who is this beautiful young lady or something. And she just looked at him like, if you don't get your ass on somewhere and get on about my face. So he walks in. She didn't say that, but you can tell by her facial expression that she wasn't going. She just was not going. Jeff decides, I guess the food was just about done, and Jeff decided, he was like, okay, so where's mom? They're all standing around drinking, having a good time. And so he went to look for their mother, and she was in her study, and she had something around her neck and a knife in her back, and she was dead. So, all right, so now it's like, okay, who killed Mama? Mama called the cot, okay? So, Rosemary and later that night, Rosemary and Laura are back at the cottage. Laura got up to get some tea, but Rosemary was already in there. She was actually reading through the book, and Edwin Caldecott's book that they had published, and she was, you know, she found it interesting because the book is basically talking about how certain flowers mean certain things, and it was a way for people to send secret messages to, you know, because if you knew the flower, the type of flower and what they meant and the arrangement, then you could kind of figure out the message of what, you know, the person was trying to convey. And so it flashed back to the crime scene, and they realized that Mrs. Caldecott, for instance, she had her will out, and they also found that the safe was open and all the jewelry boxes in there were empty. So now they're like, okay, somebody killed her, stole the jewelry. So the next day, Kate is emotional, and Gary is in there, and he's talking to her, and he's basically telling her that she could just stop, you know, with the theatrics, and how now that the woman is gone, how that her mother is gone, or the evil witch is gone, and she can now get the money. Gary, so you get to the point that Gary is a gold digger. That was probably the only reason he married Kate, but of course, it seemed like she may have found out too late that her marriage was a marriage of convenience as far as, I guess, Gary was concerned. He thought that he was going to come up on some money. And so around this time, Rosemary and Laura walked in, and they're, you know, obviously you can see that Kate is upset. You know, the night before her mother was killed, and then you got this jackass yelling at her about some money, and how she, I guess she's faking how she don't really feel the way that she's trying to pretend that she feels about her mom, and, you know, the whole thing. And of course, eventually Kate, she had enough and she walked out. And then Gary started talking about the police think that it has something to do with her will, and something else that he said. But of course, you can see that Laura and Rosemary, they don't like Gary. He just does the most. So now they're back at the waterfall. Working, and they started talking about the events of the night, and of course, you know, they trying to figure out, okay, they doing their own little investigation and trying to work through things, right? And so while they're talking, one of the police officers came to get Laura because they said the DI wanted to talk to her, and so he started asking her about their whereabouts, and he asked her what she did before she, you know, got into, I guess, landscaping, I guess is what they would be considered. I'm not sure. And she said that she was married, and she said, and before that, she was in the police. And he asked her, okay, well, why did you give it up? And she was like, because I was stupid enough to marry a DI. And you can kind of see his face like, okay, that was a dig, but we just going to go ahead and let that go. But at the time they were going through, I think maybe that was Kate's room. I'm not sure. They was searching through somebody's room. So, at this point, Laura, they finished talking to her, and she's kind of standing outside while they're in the house, going through the rooms. And, while she's standing there, Maggie walks up, and she's like, oh, what's going on? And so of course, Laura was telling her that, you know, they're questioning people. They think that the jewelry might be be the motive, and, you know, they were questioning her because they thought initially that maybe Laura and Rosemary may be jewel thieves or something crazy. So of course they kind of her and Maggie kind of laughed it off. So Rosemary, she's back at the waterfall, and Rosemary, she's kind of looking at the plants, and she was like, well, I don't understand. Because remember, Frances wanted her to just revamp the whole thing. She wanted to dig up all of the flowers. And Rosemary was like, well, you know, I can see, you know, the way that they're situated is kind of odd, but the flowers are still beautiful and healthy. And so she was like, I think it's kind of odd that, you know, she wanted us to pull all these up. One, you know, the added expense of having to pull all those up and plant all new stuff. And so she wanted to go and talk with Kate to confirm whether or not they still wanted them to do that or just keep the plants that were already there. Kate, so she left. Laura stayed behind to continue working, and Rosemary ends up running into Jeffrey, and he was, you know, she was saying she was going on her way to see Kate to ask about the flowers, and he said, oh, I was just in her office, she's not there. He asked her if, you know, they wanted them to still continue on with the mother's plans to pull the flowers up, and he was really like, man, I guess so. And then he went and started asking her this strange question about his mother's will. He was like, well, you know, the police said that that the will was out, and that they think that she may have been ready to change the will. And for some odd reason, he asked Rosemary if his mother had said anything to her. And of course, Rosemary was kind of confused. She was like, well, no, she wouldn't. But at the same time, I don't know that woman. We're employed by her. Like, why would she ask us? Why would she even tell us something about something that personal? And so he was like, oh, well, you know what? Never mind. And then he kind of walks off. But, so Laura is now back at the building. She was in the truck trying to get something out of the truck, and she saw Kate walking into the building. And of course, she, just said hi, Kate, and Kate never turned around. She just kind of waved and kept walking. And Laura, she thought it was weird, but she didn't really say too much. And so now Rosemary and Laura, they're sitting there, they're at the waterfall, and they're having lunch, and of course they're talking about obviously the case and everything that's going on. And Rosemary, while Rosemary was talking to Jeff, when she initially left to go and talk to Kate about the flowers, Rosemary, Laura actually found this carving. There was a tree that had this carving in it that initially looked like it said Edwin Caldecott and Frances Caldecott. And so, she was like, oh, that was really sweet, the parents. And then she saw Kate and Pete. They met up in some what they considered to be some clandestine site, but it was just above the waterfall. So Laura actually saw them in a romantic embrace, and now she's like, oh, okay. So now that Rosemary's back, she's showing her the carving, and she actually told her about Pete and Kate. And so Rosemary started going more and more into this book and comparing it to the flowers. And she was, I'm not going into all the technical terms of these flowers. It could be extremely long. I'm just going to break it down to what the flowers meant. And so one type of flower meant secret love. Another type of flower meant revenge. Another type of flower meant death. And the last one meant birth. And so when they went back to the tree, they realized that, it doesn't say Edwin Caldecott and Frances Caldecott. When they kind of cleaned it up, it actually said Edwin Caldecott and Funella Goff, which is Maggie's mother. And so now they're like, okay, so another piece of the puzzle. So the next day, Rosemary arrives at the hotel, because remember, they're staying in the cottage. And the front desk person told her that at this point, Laura had called her son Matthew, who's a police officer, to do a background check on Gary, because they just felt like Gary was kind of shifty. And so the front desk clerk gave Rosemary the message and to let her know that Matthew called and that he was actually going to come up to talk to her. Okay, that's fine. She gave her the message, but Rosemary was on her way up to Kate's office, or Jeffrey's office. So when she got up to the stairs, she could hear them talking, and they were arguing about the money and about the settlement. They're talking about, the Walsh's potential lawsuit. So, and it sounds like by the conversation, it seems like instead of comping their stay, he actually settled with them. Because when they said that, mom is gone now, when Kate was like, their mother's gone now, and how she should be, consulted on the financial situations, and the fact that he just sent off a check and he didn't tell her, and he was like, well, it's too late now, I've already sent the check. I mean, granted, he could have done a stop payment, but at the end of the day, he opted to do the settlement instead of just comping in the room. And so Gary started talking about, well, when is Kate going to get her half? And Gary is all about the money. And Gary's all about the money, and Kate is just all about, I want to be included in these decisions, especially when it comes to the finances. That was just her whole thing. so Rosemary walks in and she was like, it was awkward because they're like, okay, I know you could hear, but anyone could hear them. They were loud as hell arguing in the hallway, but she still walked in and was like, I just wanted to give you guys an update on the waterfall, and we think we may you have it, and want to know that if you want to come by at some point during the day to see it, then, you know, that's great. And so they kind of had this facial expression like, I know you kind of see that we're in the middle of something, but at the same time, they're like, oh, okay. And so she ended up leaving. It was a really awkward situation. So they're back at the waterfall and they're trying to see if they may have corrected the issue. Laura turns on the water, and initially it looked like it's doing pretty good, and then they can still see that the water is draining away. And so Laura was like, there was another place where Vanilla Gulf designed a waterfall, and Laura and Rosemary wanted to go over to see how their waterfall was designed, to see if maybe they have any documentation on what, you know, the design she used and the materials that she used that could potentially help them fix this issue. I mean, Rosemary knew that there was some type of clay, but she didn't know exactly what it was that, you know, they could use to probably fill, because there has to be a crack somewhere while this water is being drained off. And so they started doing the what ifs. And so they've come to the conclusion that Maggie is actually Edwin Caldicott's daughter, which would make her Jeffrey and Kate's sister. And so Rosemary was like, do you think that do you think Frances know that Maggie is Edwin's daughter? And they started talking a little bit, and then Laura was like, well, what if she was changing her will to add Maggie to the will? So they're trying to basically say that if maybe one of the kids was responsible for killing the mom, because maybe, you know, her adding Maggie to the will would kind of cut their inheritance by, I guess, a third. I don't know. And they weren't trying to do that. Just speculating, right? So Jeffrey is in his office and you can see him crunching some numbers, and he has this smile on his face. So apparently, you know, I guess the spa is doing well. So around this time, he could hear sirens. And next thing you know, you see Kate being hauled off and put in the back of the police car. And so now they're like, okay, what else can go wrong now? Yeah, so Laura's back at the nursery, and he's, you know, helping her figure out, you know, the kind of plans that she wants. Maggie is there as well. They talked a little bit, and she was asking her, you know, some stories about, you know, her mother's time there at the spa. And, you know, she had to tell her that, I grew up in foster care. You know, mom died when I was young. Like, she's had to say this a couple of times. Like, didn't know her. And so Maggie ends up leaving, and Gary arrives, and he confronts Pete. Like, I know that you and my wife are having an affair, and you know what, you could have her and good riddance and the whole thing. And this is the first time that Pete heard that Kate has been arrested, and Gary still running off at the mouth, and it got to the point where Pete just wanted to punch them in the face, and he left to go to see what was going on with Kate. So Laura was standing there because he had made some comment to her at some point about how she looks like she could use some revving up, and then she said, well, if I did, and you'd be the last guy I would ask to press the gas pedal or something. She made some comment. And so after Pete knocked him over, she was like, is this what you call being revved up? And she kind of walked off, right? So back at the spa, D.I. is now, he's in Kate's office, and Rosemary walks in, and she's like laying on the charm real thick, like, you know, oh my goodness, I knew that there was something about her, and, you know, how did you guys find out? And he started telling her about, you know, the CCTV footage, and he actually showed her the video of Kate walking into the building, and then there's a video of Kate in the office, and you know, saw her pulling one of the cabinets out and putting the jewelry in there. And then Rosemary was like, well, wait a minute, Why would she do that? Wouldn't she know that the camera is there? So why would she be doing all this for the camera? And he basically was like, you know, people do strange things. And so, of course, Rosemary, who's never really been convinced of Kate's guilt, she's like, okay, this is kind of odd. It looks odd, and I don't really know. I don't really know. So Pete bailed. I guess he bails Kate out, and they're back at the spa. They go to the room, and you can see that the room. But earlier, before you saw, shortly after Kate was arrested, you saw Gary packing up his bag and leaving. So he was leaving anyway. So by the time they got back to the spa, the room had been ransacked. I guess he found whatever he could find, and he was gone. And they were very happy that Gary was wherever the hell he was. They was happy he wasn't there. Matthew and Laura is meeting up, and it was kind of sad because Matthew came all that way because her ex-husband, or soon-to-be ex-husband, he got an offer on their home, and he needs her to sign the deed so that he could go move forward to sell the home. It's one thing to feel like your marriage is over, but you still have maybe this tiny smidgen of a hope that it could potentially be under the right circumstances, under the right moonlight at some point. Things could change. And I think that she felt that by at this point selling their family home meant that it was like over, like really over. And I think she really came, I guess it hit her harder than she expected. Now, she held it together in front of her son. She went ahead and signed the paper, but you could tell that she was devastated. Like that was her home. That was where she raised her children. You know what I'm saying? And that was sad. Rosemary, she actually went to the other, I can't remember the name of the other spa, or I don't know if that was a hotel, wherever it was. To see the other waterfall, and she was talking to the guy, and he was telling her the type of clay that she could use, and basically giving her some tips on how she could repair the damage to why this water was draining away. And then he starts telling her about the tragedy that happened, and she's like, well, what do you mean? She said, well, Fenella Golf actually drowned. She committed suicide there. She drowned there. And of course, at that point, she was shocked. Obviously, they didn't know that. They knew she died, but they never knew the specifics of how she died or where she died. And so they quickly flashed to Laura, and she's now at the waterfall. She's bawling her eyes out. She's crying because, again, coming to terms that, okay, my marriage is over. It is really over, and it's beyond repair. And yeah. So Jeffrey, he's coming out of the building, and he saw Kate walking away from the spa. And you then see Laura starts working, and she's higher up on that the landing, where the washes, where they were walking, where they thought it was stairs. She was there doing some things, and then next thing you know, Kate turns on the water. Knew she was there, turned on the water in an attempt to knock her off. She's now holding on to the pole. She's screaming for dear life. Around this time, Rosemary, she gets back to the hotel. She hear all the commotion. She goes over and push Kate out of the way to help Laura. And then they realize that it wasn't Kate all along, that it was Maggie. And of course, Jeffrey shows up, and he's trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And Laura's like, it wasn't Kate, it was Maggie, your half sister. So this is the first time he's hearing that Maggie is their sister, and how she was the one that killed their mother, and basically going into the backstory. And Laura was like, well, I never did anything to you. Why would you try to hurt me? And she was like, because you saw me when I walked into the building to plant the jewelry. Now, remember when I said that Laura was pulling some stuff out of the truck? Kate walked by. She spoke to Kate. Kate never turned around. She kind of just waved. That was Maggie. So she was like, I knew that eventually you would put two and two together, which I'm not sure she would have, because the way that she was positioned, her back was to her. So her and Kate had the exact same build, which is why the whole time you thought that it was actually Kate. And so she started talking about how Frances actually told her the truth, and told her how she found out about the affair after the book was published. Really, that's when Frances found out about the affair, and she talked about, or did she find out about the affair? No, I'm assuming she would have found out about the affair before then, because I'm assuming that was the whole point of the rift between her and Fennell and why she fired her. And I think she found out that Maggie was Edwin's daughter after reading the book, and she was trying to incorporate Maggie into the will, and but Maggie is upset because she felt like Frances is responsible for her mother's death, and the whole thing. And it's like, okay, I kind of understand you being resentful, but at the same time, girl, your mama was screwing a married man. Like, how much sympathy do you want the wife to have for the side piece? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Well, that's the only thing I could think about, really, when I was seeing that point. I get that you're upset and you felt like you were cheated and you were robbed, and whatever transpired between them back in the day resulted in your mom, I guess, falling in some depression or whatever the case may be, and her committing suicide. But at the same time, it's like, girl, your mama her hands wasn't clean either. So as they were back at the hotel and they had her in handcuffs, Kate was like, well, what did I ever do to you? She was basically like, I was just making use of the family resemblance. So if she could have she took the mama out, if she could take Kate out too, to get whatever point across that she was trying to get, then she was like, okay, They ended up taking her off to jail. And of course, it flashed to happier times with them standing by the waterfall. The work was all done. The waterfall worked. Everything was all good. And, Laura made the comment, like, I hope I don't see, like, some issue behind every flower. Because remember, according to the language of flowers, it seems like each flower means something. And so in each, I guess, arrangement of flowers, it's supposed to convey some type of message. And so she's like, I hope I'm not going to see, like, some story behind every flower. I just like it better when flowers are just flowers. And that was basically how it went off. Laura asked her about the conversation between her and Matt and how it went, and they decided they was going to go and have them a nice cold drink, and that was how the episode ended. And so I need to end this here. I'm going to try to make these videos a lot shorter, and so it cuts down on upload time, because I swear that last video, it seemed like it took all day. So I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.